In this video, we're going to compile everything we know about Overwatch 2 thus far, combining leaks, statements made by the Blizzard president, as well as looking at Blizzard's behavior when handling their other intellectual property. First, the Kotaku leak from a few days ago that said Overwatch 2 will be announced at Blizzcon and have a large PvE element, think Left 4 Dead. Now here's the thing, only part of this I even consider a leak, because an Overwatch 2 or an Overwatch expansion has practically been screamed from the developer's lips over and over again. I think the main thing most people remember when Activision Blizzard laid off 8% of their workforce was the negative press headlines surrounding that. But most people forget a sort of bittersweet aspect of that whole deal was that to compete with the pace of development of a game like Fortnite, which has a massive team just churning out content constantly, they were going to increase the number of developers they had working on their current franchises by 20%. You don't buff up your workforce just to keep churning out more skins and maps. They already have enough to do that. Hiring more devs is to expand, not to maintain what you already have. And this as much has been said publicly by the president of the company, J. Allen Brack, in extended interviews. He talks about all their IPs, of course, but Overwatch specifically, he all but says more Overwatch games will be coming. And if Blizzard was smart, they wouldn't go for a cash grab mobile game. They instead would buff up Overwatch as it is now and expand on it or create more value to incentivize players on the platforms that exist now. Which is interesting because 2019 being a year that we're getting all sorts of goodies lines up with how they've handled other IPs in the past. What do I mean? Well, first, let's put this off to one side just to remember that none of the slasher leaks have been disproven. A lot of people were upset that 222 didn't go into the Overwatch League and all that, but that doesn't mean it isn't coming, and we still don't know what the summer feature is going to be. That's on its way, I don't know, tomorrow? At any point it could be coming. With so many of these things coming through, it's almost as if Slasher's wish list was a checklist for Blizzard. Tweaking 2CP, solo duo queue, replays are coming out. I still haven't lost hope that a 222 might be on its way. I just think it got delayed, and I bet we may get even more of this as well. They've talked about the scoreboard in the past. I bet that's on its way, but look at what we've already got. The workshop completely out of nowhere. Replay system on the very next patch. You may have forgotten we're getting that. So much other things have been in the news. This is right around the corner. Okay, now why is that significant? Well, if you look at the way Blizzard have handled previous IPs, they do this type of overload, where they start hitting the fans with a barrage of value as if it was shot out of a machine gun right before they're going to release the next thing. I wouldn't be surprised if not only the Kotaku leaks were true, but we could even possibly see Overwatch 2 with this PvE gameplay as early as Q1 of 2020. Because if you announce it at BlizzCon, I don't think you want a massive gap for the hype to die down, especially with the momentum of all these other features that Overwatch is going to be adding. By the time we get to BlizzCon, we'll have the summer social feature and maybe a couple other big things as well. It's this type of momentum that Blizzard brings and ramps up with all of their franchises. Heroes of the Storm, maybe the weakest one, but they ramped up to give that a ranked overhaul just last year. The expansion model of adding onto their game franchises has been something they've obviously done in the past with games like StarCraft, World of Warcraft, etc. And even relatively recently, in the last couple years, they've added single-player elements to a multiplayer game in Hearthstone to great success, adding game elements called solo adventures, where you do mission-based card games. I'll say the dungeon run is probably the most fun I've ever had playing Hearthstone, and with the experience and development time that they've put into the archives missions and how many resources they were dedicating to that, despite it probably not being the best return on investment for Overwatch 1, you can imagine where buffing up their engine and their dev team's strength of creating those types of modes could transition into a more full-scale PvE type mission. And I haven't even mentioned what I think is the core best example. Diablo 3, a game that at launch was critically panned as hard as any game ever was. The incentive system and the structure was completely off, a major disappointment to fans across the globe. However, they buckled down and put the work in to try to improve the game. They removed the feature everybody hated, the real money auction house, but instead dropped multiple improvements at once, before they even released the expansion, Reaper of Souls. They called it Patch 2.0, which came with a load of things, and largely dubbed by the community Loot 2.0. Now, in case you don't know anything about Diablo, I will translate this into Overwatch terms, but what they added to the game was a revamped loot system, a long list of difficulty settings, which is really important for engaging gameplay to challenge yourself and get more rewards for it, a big buff to the late game with the Paragon system, and they added clans and community communities. This multi-pronged approach looks very similar to what Overwatch is doing. Workshops, replays. Loot 2.0 for Diablo would be like a ranked 2.0 for Overwatch. Originally, the Diablo 3 loot system was pretty terrible, and for a game that's all about collecting loot, you would think they would get that right. The new system changed that entirely, and I can proudly say that I've come to buy this game, Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls, 3 times now. I bought it on the PC and was disappointed. They fixed a lot of this stuff, and I bought it on the PlayStation to play with my wife, and then it came on the Switch, and I just had to get it there too, just to see how good it was, and it was amazing on the Switch, by the way. One of the best optimized games for that little piece of hardware that I've seen thus far. Runs like a dream. But the beautiful thing about this is what Blizzard does is that they do these massive overhauls to their game to buff them up for future expansion. And they knew they had to do this first before they dared try to release a content expansion that you had to pay for. Well, that sounds quite similar to Overwatch as it stands right now, doesn't it? If they want us to buy some kind of story mode, PvE mission, even if it's a standalone sequel or something separate, or an add-on to Overwatch, the reputation of the game has to change. They know that. And right now, we're in the middle of that, which is what makes it so exciting. Jeff has already told us in a recent interview that we should expect the Summer Games event to come at a different time this year. I always thought it was weird it came in August. That's probably going to come earlier. And maybe with that change of pace, we get the next step of ranked. Other things that I think is reasonable to expect with the expansion slash sequel, whatever you want to call it, coming out, would be perhaps a hero drop. How many times in the last year or more has Blizzard said they've had more heroes in development than ever? Well, what, are they just stockpiling heroes for a rainy day? They're always really skittish around answers like, well, surely that means you're going to increase the number of hero releases per year. No, we're not saying that. We're just going into overdrive with heroes for no reason at all. We'll keep drip feeding them out 3 a year, even though we have 6 in development and even more on the way. Yeah, no way. I think at least 3 new heroes are going to be added, if not more, and we're probably going to see them at BlizzCon as well. Overwatch has done this in the past. When the game was in beta phase, they dropped 3 heroes at once, and granted, they've never done that again. However, we've been on the maintenance phase of releasing heroes on their scheduled time period. Well, now they're mixing up the events, and I think it's reasonable to expect them to finally spend that effort they put in to developing all those heroes in conjunction with the expansion launching, giving a double threat to really amp up the hype for the game. Other things we might expect is probably a new game mode. Seems reasonable. We've talked about that in previous videos referring to other interviews the developers have taken. Aaron Keller's most recently talked about it, and he's had to skirt around it as to not give anything away, but still somehow discuss it at the same time. Reason being, I think a new one or multiple may come with the expansion, and probably more maps too, but that's probably the least thing we need right now, in my opinion. Community barely knows how to play the maps we got. Please stop adding more maps, but more content overall, especially if the game's not going free to play. I'd have the expectation of that level of content coming through. It all just depends which route they want to go. I'm not sure how confident Blizzard Activision would be in how much more money they can make on loot boxes as it is. I would imagine that it's got to be dwindling because it's such a fair business model in comparison to some of the more egregious ones that exist, especially if you compare it to something like Hearthstone, which is fairly expensive to play, but reasonable in the realm of card games and other things similar to it. Overwatch is not like that, and in fact, it gets easier to collect more and more skins the longer you play on your account, because you only need so many. They toss loot boxes at you left, right, and center, so unless they're going to go down a cosmetics overhaul of some sort, I'm not so sure how I feel about free to play. That's a move I would be very excited for, but I think with the scale of the amount of content they want to bring out, I think we may see the Overwatch base game go on a price decrease first before free to play comes. It's gone on sale a lot, but not like a flat out, okay, now Overwatch 1 is $20. I think that move will happen first before we see them move free to play. But you can most definitely expect a Reaper of Souls type console release where this new expansion with whatever it comes with it will be tied in with the base game. So you probably can get it as like an expansion with a separate price if you already own Overwatch. But for new players, it'll likely be something like a $60 or $40 standalone product that gives you everything, which, as I said earlier with Diablo, makes customers, I think, really happy, because if you just come into Overwatch at that point, I mean, you're going to have so many features and cool things. You won't have suffered through the dark ages of the players slogging through trying to enjoy the game without those features. BlizzCon's just a few short months away, and we're riding the tidal wave right now. So what can we conclude from all of this? Well, leaks aside, I think it's an inevitability that we're going to see more Overwatch games. They flat out said that. And with BlizzCon going so poorly last year, you gotta think that they're bringing the big guns this year. It's kind of felt that way anyway with the BlizzCons. Like every other year is oscillating between awesome and meh, sort of like Windows operating systems in that way. But specifically into the what comes down to which route do they want to go. Jason Schreier followed up on his piece on Kotaku with this tweet saying he doesn't know if Overwatch 2 will be the final name, but that's sort of the internal name for the game thus far inside Blizzard. I do know that it's mostly, maybe entirely, all PvE, and it's easy for him to imagine it combining with Overwatch 1's PvP in some way. So this seems to make sense. I think it's pretty easy to discount that we would be getting an entirely new Overwatch game with all new maps, new heroes, that kind of thing. It's just not Blizzard's style. I wouldn't have even considered that as an option. However, it's still unclear whether the quote-unquote sequel will either be a expand-alone, which is to say a separate purchasable product, separate from the original game completely. You could just buy it and then play the new modes, or will Blizzard require you to have the original Overwatch to add it onto it? That's more of the expansion model that we've seen them do in games previously. However, I will say, Blizzard has already dabbled with the free-to-play market recently. Obviously, Hearthstone was a massive success. They recently turned StarCraft into free-to-play, which is probably a move that took them too long to make. And Overwatch has already been kind of a mix of free-to-play elements, where, yeah, it's a full-price game on the console, sorry about that, but on PC it was a reduced price, supported by microtransactions, but only cosmetic ones to sort of make that fair. So it was like the best of both worlds in that way. I also think it would make a lot of sense to make Overwatch free-to-play in the multiplayer sense, then with this expansion onto it where you can pay to play the PvE missions. That would be sensational if they went that route, and would be more along the lines of what they do with Hearthstone, where you can play the multiplayer game as much as you want, grind up for the currency to unlock cards without even buying anything, but in order to play this sort of premium mission-based content, you have to pay to gain access to it. And in my experience, it's been completely worth it. My expectations for the PvE missions is a legit game, well thought out and paced in the way that we know Blizzard can do. And in comparison, I'd say the event PvE co-op missions would be like, I don't know, 10% of what a full-fledged expansion or sequel would look like. Or if they don't go to the free-to-play route, it could be more like the Diablo 3 model, where they ramp up everything that they're improving to the game, then tack on the extra bit of content, and frankly, with Diablo 3, all of the systems and add-ons that they put into the game outside of the extra content, the new character, new act with new quests and stuff, all that physical content, in my opinion, had way less value than the systems overhaul did. So that any new player that comes in and buys Diablo 3, like on your console right now, you have a vastly superior experience to what the launch day Diablo 3 players had. I mean, it's just night and day. It's the difference between the game being almost unplayable to one of the best games ever. And that's how I see them going with Overwatch this year. They're ramping up all of these features so they just hit you with overwhelming amounts of value, because how much easier is it going to be for them to sell you on buying into this IP if the reputation of ranked play is totally different, right? Overwatch in 2020 onward is going to make the first 3 years of Overwatch's life feel like the Dark Ages. We'll very soon forget how we existed before the implementation of workshop replays and this mythical ranked 2.0 that we have no idea exactly what it is, but it should be on its way this summer. So as Jason Schreier puts it, I wouldn't be surprised if he's right in saying it's just the PvE stuff, because really the value that they're adding into the PvP game is what most players are going to play. They want to grow that size of the pie, so you also buy the PvE stuff. But if you've been watching gaming trends recently, I can't remember when this report was, but I believe it was something like half of Activision's revenue came from microtransactions. Yeah, they want to get you back in buying loot boxes, and a story mode is a great way to invite new players into the Overwatch universe. And fixing all of the things that the core fans care about makes for this entire process to be a very painless transition. At the moment, I know a lot of us feel like, oh, how dare you talk about Overwatch 2 when you haven't really fixed Overwatch 1 yet, but Blizzard hasn't officially announced this yet. In context, when it comes out in November, I think we're going to feel a lot better about the state of the game and where it's going, because I already feel quite optimistic. There's just a few last things on the checklist, and they should be rolling out over the course of weeks, months, or maybe even days. Guys, that's everything for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out. Lets us know that you're enjoying the content. content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news updates and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for Yo Overwatch. See you guys next time.